All right, students, this will be a continuation of Political Spectrum. This will be part 2 of Political Spectrum number 2. All right, so today is some extra sort of history story day. I'm going to tell some historical stories. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to sort of do I'm going to use my pencil here and make sure that my 5 areas are divided up specifically here. Okay, how's that look? Okay, does that look okay? That'll give you a little bit better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you recall last time I talked about how the United States is actually a democratic republic, a rule by law society. All right, now let me give you some examples from history. So I'm basically making the argument there's really only 2 types of government systems ever: oligarchies and republics. I think that ancient history was dominated by oligarchies. Not very many republics in ancient history. Modern times, there's a lot more republics, but do we still have oligarchies in modern times? Yeah, we sure do. We talked about that way over here with these guys. You know, look, do I use the word dictator? Would I ever use the word dictator? Sure, because that still describes these guys. But my point is that a guy acting singularly is impossible. Would I still use the word a democracy? Yeah, I would probably use democratic republic more often than I would use the word democracy, but I still will use that term. All right? Okay, so let's do a little history lesson, and that's why I've left all this space up here. Okay? I wanted to tell you about the story of so I'm right above the oligarchy here. I wanted to tell you about the story of France. All right? And France, this is 1789, and their king at this time was a guy named Louis the 16th. All right, maybe you've heard this is a very famous moment in history. Let's see if I can get this so it looks good. Okay, well, Louis' family had been ruling France for a long time. They lived in a big, humongous palace outside of Paris. And guess what happened to France? They had basically a revolution. And what happened was that France went from here to here. Okay? They tried republic. And they tried something called a national assembly. All right? And this was an elected governing body. They attempted to have. By the way, I'll tell you something. That today's modern France they call themselves the Fifth Republic. The 5th one was formed after World War II. This was the first one they tried, and basically this went on for a little while. But the society fell into anarchy, and this was called the Reign of Terror. And this was a brutal time period. Maybe you've heard of the guillotine machine, where people that were loyal to the king were chopping people's heads off that wanted to be a democratic republic and vice versa. It was an ugly, nasty time. But the point of my story is, what does France end up with? Where did France end up when this was all said and done? They ended up with a guy named Napoleon in 1799. So my point of my story is, I'm trying to make a point here about how fragile republics are, how difficult they are to maintain, how you can have you have the right amount of law, you have too much law, and then you write too many laws, or you even vote for or pass too many laws, and then what happens to your freedom? It decreases. Same thing if you don't have enough laws, if you don't have enough people buying in, if you have people ignoring law, then what do you have? You have chaos. You have anarchy. And so what we see over and over again in history is this story where a society that starts off as an oligarchy ends up back as an oligarchy. Let me give you another example. How about Russia? Okay, the year is 1917. The Tsar's name was Nicholas II. and Nicholas's family had been ruling. Nicholas's family had been ruling Russia for 300 years by that time. Like I said, there's a lot of czars, and Russia had a revolution. They got tired of that, and Russia tried to have a. Russia got basically a governing body called the Duma, which was basically a legislative body. You know, when I say legislative body, you should think like our House of Representatives or Senate, people who are voted in to represent the people. Okay, so they tried this, and even when Nicholas was still czar, he had this, and they ran this. Basically, it was a provisional government. Probably that's what I should have written here is provisional government. All right. But the provisional government, in this case, lasted about 8 months. And guess what happened to Russia? They fell into anarchy. And this was called the Red, that's why I used red pen today, Red Terror. Okay? Now, my point is, and this was a civil war between the Reds and the Whites, the supporters of Nicholas versus the communists who eventually take over, and that's my point. Guess what Russia ends up having? They boomerang back to a oligarchy, and we have a guy named Lenin take over, and then Stalin and those guys afterwards. All right? Okay? How about my story of Germany? Okay? Germany, and the guy's name was the year was 1918. The guy's name was Wilhelm II. He was called the Kaiser. He was their king. That's an M, Wilhelm. Okay? And at the end of World War II, Germany lost, and they were forced to not have a king anymore. And they ended up having what was called the Weimar Republic. All right? By treaty at the end of World War II, Germany was forced to have a republic. Okay, and this thing lasted about 10 years. Okay, and guess what happened? Well, they had a significant event, and it was called, okay, you gotta bear with me now, this is called the Reichstag Fire. Now, what the heck is that, Mr. O'Brien? Well, that was an event. Let me zoom in on that for you. That was an event. The Reichstag was what you have to imagine is the United States Capitol building catching on fire. And so the Reichstag was arsonized, and what many people believed was that a communist guy did it. And so what happened is that Hitler, and that's what my point is, you can see history repeats itself, as I like to say. What does Germany end up with? They end up with a guy named Hitler. Okay? The Reichstag fire, Hitler requested more power to deal with the people that may have done the Reichstag fire. So they took advantage of a terrible event to get power back. Okay? All right, my next story, let's do this one. Let's do the Roman Republic. So we'll start here. The year, I'm going to call this Roman Republic. Okay? And we're going to say the year is 42 BC. All right? And, you know, by that time, the Romans had had a republic for 500 years. And so what happened? Well, you may remember the march by Julius Caesar on Rome. All right? So the Roman Civil War is started by Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar broke the law. He was a returning general. He was returning from France, and by law he was supposed to give up his generalship before he entered the city. He did not. He broke the law. This sent the society into civil war. Well, who emerged? Julius Caesar did that. Purposely broke the law, caused the anarchy. So what does Rome end up with? Do they end up with the republic? No. They end up with who? They end up with Julius Caesar's family member. Julius Caesar, of course, was assassinated, and this guy's name was Augustus. And from then on, for the next 500 years, Rome had a oligarch system. Okay? All right, so you may say, well, come on, Mr. Brown, that's all ancient history stuff. Oh, okay, all right, let me give you a modern one. How about modern day Iraq? And I would even add Iraq down here to the list of republics. This is a very fragile republic. This is sort of my point. We're still relatively new. It's barely 15 years old, and they're barely hanging in there. Okay, so the year was 2002, and the guy's name was Saddam Hussein. Okay, and the United States comes in and they topple Saddam Hussein, and so what we have right here, right, still going on is the Iraqi Republic. Now, this has not been anything but smooth, has it? What do we see going on? All right, what group of people? I'll just say internal strife. How's that sound? Internal strife. A lot of that stuff going on. Civil war. Well, what is the group that's doing this? Now, they've been beaten back and they've been pushed back and they've been, in many cases, destroyed in some of the places they have in Iraq. But who was the group that was causing the internal strife? Do you remember ISIS? You recall those guys? All right. Now, what's the point of my whole story? The point of my story is, what do you notice happening if you look very, very carefully at all of this stuff, at all of these examples? Well, what I notice is that in many cases, guess who? The society is living in a republic. This is another example of my point about fragility of republics. People within the republic, what did they do? They caused the anarchy. Most historians agree, yeah, they caught a communist guy at the scene, but it was the Nazis that set the fire. The communists were the ones who started the Civil War. Napoleon was basically a leader at that time, but he allowed the Reign of Terror to continue going, and even though some say the Reign of Terror was over, the bloodshed continued. Julius Caesar broke the law. Who is causing the anarchy within the republics? It's the exact people who want to regain the power. It's the exact small group of people that want to regain the power. Do you recall when I did this? Oligarchies, if you really think about them, oligarchies always claim to try to create a society with a flat line where everybody's equal. But what always emerges in an oligarchy? Some small group of people, a few people, always emerge, okay, to run things. So, they claim to want to create a horizontal society. I mean, I would ask you very simply, is that a horizontal society? I would say no, that's a vertical society. But that's what always happens. This is what history shows us. Okay? Now, let me throw this out at you. I like to study history because it has a tendency to repeat itself, to rhyme. Sometimes people call it that. But and I like that. One of the fun things about history is that sometimes you will find exceptions to the rule. And so one of the things I always say that a great exception to the rule, and why a lot of people like to study Sparta, is there was never before or ever since a society like Sparta. It is super duper unique. There's nothing like it ever in the world. And they're kind of interesting, aren't they? They're pretty brutal, but they're super duper interesting. You can't really compare them to anything else. Even though I'm comparing them to big government oligarchies, I think that you would all agree that they're super unique. So in this little story right here that I'm trying to tell you, I wanted to say that there is an exception. There is a place in history where the place started off here, okay, but did not ricochet back. Can you think of that place? Maybe you want to stop the tape, stop the video here to think about it. Can you think of a place that started here but did not boomerang back to it and is today a republic? Okay, so here is my last example. These people, I'm going to call them the British colonists of North America. All right? The year is 1776. All right, and the leader of these British colonies is a guy back in England. His name is George, I believe it's the third. Might be George II. Just give me a break if I don't have that exactly correct. Okay, so here's what happened. Here's the weird thing that happened. All right, the British colonists of North America, the colonies, fell into what is in essence, these are all, the colonists are all basically descendants of people from England. They're technically English citizens, but the point is that guess what the colonies fell into? They fell into what was in essence a civil war. We call it the American Revolution. Okay? We call it the American Revolution. And then by those colonists who fought to get out from underneath George III, out from the King of England, what did they end up having? Well, they ended up having a republic. And we call this republic today, we call it the let's do it. Let's make it look nice. S. A. And isn't this an interesting sort of story? Okay, the USA. And so that's my example of something, a place that was different. Okay? So again, my point is, I'm trying to say here, is this is extremely, extremely fragile down here. This is not easy. Okay, so you can see the many cases of history where this has gone, this republic thing has gone bad. So I would sort of throw out to you, you live in a republic, watch out for the ones who are trying to cause chaos. Right now, let me throw this, a couple of other things out of here. Let's, dictatorship. I'm going to throw this name down. I'm going to give you another example of an oddity of history, what I think is an interesting, different, something unique and special, different of history. So I've got dictators here. How about I throw this one down? His name was Kamehameha. Now you may say, okay, Kamehameha, look, he was a king. He certainly was a dictator. He went to war to dominate large amounts of land, not necessarily large, of course this is an island chain, but the point is he was a king. And then his family, here we go, his family continued to rule. So you may say, well, whoa, hold on now, Mr. O'Brien, that's not, that we don't want Kamehameha associated with these other people. And I look, I'm going to say, this is my point about the uniqueness. Hawaii is extremely unique because the vast majority of historical oligarchs and dictators have been brutal to their people. Now, yes, Kamehameha went to war against other Hawaiians on other islands, but I would have to say that his family that ruled, and him to a degree, these people were benevolent. You understand what benevolent means? They were kind. Okay? They were kind. And that is not the norm. Again, see, this is my point. I think Sparta is unique and different. I think the USA is unique and different. I think Hawaii is unique and different because this is one of the only places I can think of in which the dictator, the oligarchs, the ruling elites, the small group of elites up here were benevolent. So do you see how, I mean, there's an element I would have to sort of say, you have an amazing history. And look, I know this is there's a lot of divisiveness, okay? But my point is, you people come from a very fascinating and interesting and unique cultural history. You live in a place that is a free place right now, okay? It's unique, isn't it? I mean, people will argue with what I'm saying right here, but I just think it's fascinating and unique. Okay? All right, now let me add two other things here. Let me add these down here at the bottom. I want to say, okay, so let's do a couple other labels here. So what we're going to do is over here, we're going to say this is the liberal side, okay, and then this is the conservative side, and don't look into too much exactly where I wrote them, okay. There's a couple other terms I would use down here, and one of them is this is the constitutionalist side. Remember this term? And I use this in reference to the United States Constitution. What does the United States Constitution say? It says two things. It says the rights of all citizens, but it also says what the government can do. And it doesn't say the government can do much. The point I'm trying to make here is, what is my original line, the amount of government? So constitutionalists like less government. This is a new term I think I'm going to give you. I don't think I gave you this before, but this is the side that is the statist. These people are statists. They like the power of the state. They think that more government is the way to achieve equality, to achieve the fact that nobody gets left behind, as I commented, and government is the only way to do that. Okay? All right, now, so statist versus constitutionalist is another way to sort of talk about the political spectrum. And then the last thing I'm going to add here is I'm going to add along the line. All right, so I'm going to go down this way. So I'm going to go from the middle this way, right down along the line, as such, like so, with an arrow. Okay, and then I'm going to go with the red pen. I'm going to go up from this line with a red pen, like so. Up we go. Okay, and my point I'm trying to make here is that this is what you did this the other day. Okay, so this is the capitalism side. Capitalism. And this side is the socialism side. Okay? All right? And so there you have sort of trying to tie everything together that we've sort of talked about so far with the political spectrum. You had the chart the other day with socialism and capitalism. Where would those belong on political spectrum number 2? You know, there is a degree, you know, my point is that there is a degree of, you can kind of take this thing as well and do the same sort of thing with this, okay? Because which people caused my point is, which people caused the anarchy? The exact oligarchs who are trying to create power for themselves. So sort of like political spectrum number 1, you could make the argument that there's an element where there's a degree where the political spectrum number 2 is also a circle, if you would so desire. Okay, everybody, that is political spectrum number 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this is one of my favorite things that I like to talk about in class. I think it explains a lot. I think this is applicable to all sorts of different times and different places. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. There's things that you may not necessarily have thought about, I hope, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a good time hearing my discussion about the political spectrum number 2. There'll be more political spectrums coming up, so be ready. Okay, aloha, thank you.